Hello and welcome to Indus News. Live from Islamabad, I'm Naila Shuja and these are the headlines. In Afghanistan, the Taliban say 35 civilians have been killed in attacks by government troops during the past 2 weeks. In a statement, they urged the international human rights organizations to help prevent such brutalities. Meanwhile, President Ashraf Ghani said the Afghan forces have played a key role in fighting terrorism. Pakistan is observing the second anniversary of Operation Swift Retort as Surprise Day. The day is being commemorated to pay tribute to the Pakistan Air Force that downed 2 Indian fighter jets after they violated Pakistan's airspace and captured Indian pilot Wing Commander Abhinandan Vardhaman. President Arif Alvi said he salutes Pakistan's valiant forces and nation for showing their resolve against India's military's misadventure 2 years ago. Prime Minister Imran Khan said Pakistan responded with determined resolve at the time and place of its choosing. Addressing a ceremony, Air Chief Marshal Mujahid Anwar Khan said Pakistan's desire for peace should not be misunderstood. Saudi Arabia has rejected U.S. reports finding that the Crown Prince approved the plan to kill or capture journalist Jamal Khashoggi in 2018. In a statement, Saudi Foreign Ministry termed the report negative and false, saying the journalist's killing was a heinous crime by a rogue group. Earlier, the United States sanctioned 76 Saudis, including senior intelligence officials, under a new policy, the Khashoggi ban. A woman has been shot dead during an anti-coup protest in Myanmar's Munyawa town. Meanwhile, police fired tear gas at crowds and detained dozens of protesters to prevent more demonstrations. At the United Nations, Myanmar's envoy urged the world body to use any means necessary to take action against the military. Earlier, Myanmar's military-appointed election commission annulled the November poll results. The U.S. House of Representatives has passed President Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package. The lower chamber passed the sweeping measure by a vote of 219 to 212 and sent it to the Senate. Meanwhile, Pakistan has registered over 1,300 new cases and 33 deaths overnight, taking its toll to 12,837. Globally, the coronavirus has claimed over 2.5 million lives and infected over 113 million people. And in the Pakistan Super League, the Karachi Kings beat the Multan Sultans by 7 wickets at the National Stadium in Karachi. The Kings chased down the target of 196 runs with balls to spare, thanks to Babar Azam. In the later fixture, Peshawar Zalmi will face Islamabad United at the same venue. For more news and details, stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back. In Afghanistan, the Taliban say 35 civilians have been killed in attacks by government troops during the past 2 weeks. In a statement, they said that the Afghan forces carried out 43 airstrikes and ground attacks targeting civilians across the country. The group urged international human rights organizations to help prevent such brutalities. Meanwhile, President Ashraf Ghani said Afghan forces have played a prominent role in fighting terrorism. He said the world community has kept Afghans away from their basic rights over the last 4 decades. The president said violence in the country must end and there should be no more bloodshed. Pakistan is celebrating the second anniversary of Operation Swift Retort when Pakistani forces responded to Indian aggression. The Pakistan Air Force downed 2 Indian fighter jets for violating airspace and captured a pilot. President Arif Alvi said he salutes Pakistan's valiant forces and nation for showing resolve against India's military misadventures 2 years ago.
Prime Minister Imran Khan said, being a proud nation, Pakistan responded with determined resolve at a time and place of its choosing. In a tweet, Khan said Pakistan showed the world its responsible behavior by returning the captured Indian pilot. He also welcomed the restoration of ceasefire along the line of control. The Prime Minister added the onus of creating an enabling environment for further progress rests with India. Meanwhile, armed forces said Pakistan stands for peace, but it will respond with might when challenged. Addressing a ceremony at Air Headquarters Islamabad, Air Chief Marshal Mujahid Anwar Khan said Pakistan Air Force response to Indian aggression made the nation proud. He said Pakistan's desire for peace should not be misunderstood. Pakistan Air Force jets, including JF-17 Thunder, also presented flypast in the ceremony. In a tweet, the military's media wing said Pakistan Air Force will always defend the country against all threats. Earlier, the Foreign Office reiterated that aggressors will be met with the same response in case of any misadventure.
Pakistan is observing the second anniversary of Operation Swift Retort as Surprise Day. The day is being commemorated to pay tribute to the pilots of the PAF who downed 2 Indian fighter jets after they violated Pakistan's airspace. More in this day report.
It all started after India issued belligerent statements of attacking Pakistan following its false flag operation in Pulwama that killed 40 Indian soldiers. To act on its nefarious designs, the Indian Air Force conducted a strike in Pakistan's town of Balakot, which the Pakistan Air Force promptly responded to the next day. Pakistan Air Force shot down 2 Indian jets that flew 4 kilometers inside Pakistan's territory, violating its airspace.
It was close to 10 in the morning. I heard a loud explosion after our jets broke the sound barrier. I received news on the telephone that our response against the Indian aggression was underway, and also the downing of an Indian jet. I ordered my troops to mobilize and sent the quick reaction force to crash site to cordon off the area.
Pakistan Air Force jets shot down India's MiG-21 and another jet Su-30. Pakistan Army caught one of the Indian pilots, Wing Commander Abhinandan Varthaman, who was being thrashed by a mob of local people.
We rescued pilot Abhinandan, searched him, provided him with first aid, and then brought him to unit's headquarters. Later, we handed him over to military hospital for a thorough checkup. I checked his vital signs and gave him a painkiller and other fluids and addressed his injuries. I kept him at the headquarters for 2 hours to make sure he was okay and had no life-threatening issues. Later, on the instructions of Brigadier Headquarters Director, I took him to another medical facility where he was examined again.
The Indian Wing Commander also acknowledged the professionalism of Pakistan Armed Forces.
At that instant, 2 soldiers of Pakistan Army came and rescued me. One of them, who was a captain, took me to their unit where I was given first aid. Later, I was taken to a hospital for further treated. I find the Pakistan Army a very fine professional force and very chivalrous. I am very impressed by the chivalry which was being displayed by the Pakistan Army.
Pakistan's brave pilots proved their mettle and dominance in the air warfare domain and outsmarted the Indian Air Force.
I was in my unit's area when I noticed a lot of aerial activity. Meanwhile, we heard an explosion in the sector where I saw a MiG-21 Bison plummeting towards the earth as a fireball. I was ordered to take the downed pilot to a rescue site.
New Delhi's false flag operation of Pulwama was exposed during the recent chat leaks of Indian firebrand journalist Arnab Goswami. The leak strengthened Pakistan's narrative of striving for peace and laid bare India's hostile activities in the region.
For more on this, we are joined by Air Commodore Iftikhar Bajwa, retired from Karachi. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. Now, Pakistan is observing the second anniversary of Operation Swift Retort as Surprise Day. How do you see Pakistan's victory over Indian aggression?
Surprise Day, I don't think, first of all, that the response was a surprise to them. I'm sure if they had done this aggression, and they must have been expecting some sort of response. But the type of response itself and the time of response and what we achieved out of this response must be a surprise to them. So I'm sure I can say it with full confidence that it was certainly a job well done by the pilots and the whole Air Force and the Defense Forces of Pakistan. And they got a very befitting response. Perhaps they may not have been expecting what we finally were able to do, alhamdulillah, with the grace of Allah Almighty. And it was definitely a very befitting thing that we did to them.
Air Commodore Iftikhar Bajwa. Now, Pakistan has been warning the world against Indian false flag operations. Can India repeat the mistake after Pakistan's Operation Swift Retort?
Under the given situation and circumstances, statistically speaking, I don't think India is in a position to do this, especially in the wake of the response they got from Pakistan as a result of our operation against their aggression. And furthermore, their economic situation and their internal disturbances, I don't think, would allow them to get into any such venturing. And they may have a euphoria of having a Rafale thing, and maybe when the Rafales are operational down the line in 3 years or so, because an aircraft induction itself doesn't mean anything unless it gets operational, they may have a feeling that after 3 years that they have some sort of confidence to undertake such venturing. I don't think at present they're in a position to. But we, being Pakistanis and looking into the history, we should always be on guard because there may be some venturing from their side to divert the internal situation, what is happening in East Punjab. They may do something, but I think the chances to me are reasonably remote that they will get into any such thing anytime soon.
Air Commodore Iftikhar Bajwa, thank you so much for speaking to Indus News. Now, we are joined by Air Marshal Shahid Latif, retired. Now, thank you so much for joining us. Now, Mr. Latif, Pakistan's armed forces defense posture has been once again tested in Operation Swift Retort that has crushed India's rhetoric of being the most powerful regional power. However, we have also seen obnoxious remarks from Indian media after the recent ceasefire agreement. What would you like to say on that?
I think the remarks by the Indian media have now become a common feature, and we don't take them seriously in the sense that they're full of exaggeration and full of false propaganda. So in my opinion, what we did on the 27th of February was something that was seen by everybody, whereas Indian media was constantly trying to malign Pakistan. And before that, if you saw the Indian behavior, it was followed by a false flag operation in Pulwama, which is also a routine matter now with India. And they think that by speaking aggressively against Pakistan, they can invite the attention of people, and that is the way they can win votes. So India does not figure out with us, but Pakistan figures out every time in their election campaign.
Air Marshal Shahid Latif, now Pakistan has been warning the world against Indian false flag operations. Can India repeat another mistake after Operation Swift Retort?
Indians should have learned their lesson. After decades of 1965 war, we repeated our performance, and we showed them that even today, Pakistan Air Force is fully capable and fully vigilant in terms of facing India on any account. Any operation against Pakistan should be thought of. Follow-up to the false flag operation earned them huge embarrassment, and nothing that they claimed. For example, they said that they were out to go for the terrorist camps, whereas not true, as proven by the media from various countries and even by India itself. So they did not attack any terrorist camps over there. They just came and launched attack in an unknown area, and that they termed as Balakot and terrorist camps.
Air Marshal Shahid Latif, thank you so much for speaking to Indus News. And now we are joined by General Mohammad Mansha, retired. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, General Mansha, on the second anniversary of Operation Swift Retort, how do you see Pakistan's armed forces' readiness to defeat any aggression of the enemy?
First, we need to reflect on the background of this, the so-called surgical strike. The Indian had been harping on this with a purpose, with an intention, that is to tame Pakistan to respond. And in this, the international establishment was also supporting them, and that is why they were trying to project something which they couldn't do it, and they undermined Pakistani capability and Pakistani resolve. And I think this was a God-given opportunity that Pakistanis, they not only calculated, but they responded in the most professional manner with that is deep calculations and a very well thought out planning. Pakistani armed forces, they have demonstrated that is a higher degree of professionalism, and Pakistani pilots, in particular Pakistani Air Force, has been always on top of the air forces of the world.
Now, Major General Mansha, recently Pakistan and India agreed to strictly observe all ceasefire agreements along the line of control and other sectors. Will this agreement help minimize the tensions between both of the countries?
Such like agreements, actually this agreement existed and this was concluded back in 2003. I have been on the LOC and violations, particularly from Indian, that is a matter of routine. And such like conversations, such like agreements, these are matter of routine. And Indians really do not care much about it. Given an opportunity, they will still violate and they will create problem for Pakistan. But for the time being, it is to be welcomed because both the countries, they have their own problems. And now not only Pakistan has its internal issues, the Indians too have very serious internal problems like Khalistan and other the problems with the Chinese border and all that. And I think it is in this backdrop that they want to have some respite and they have agreed upon for a ceasefire.
Major General Mohammad Mansha, thank you so much for taking the time out to speak to Indus News. Now moving on, it has been 19 years since a mob of Hindu extremists massacred over 2,000 Muslims in the Indian state of Gujarat. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who was then a chief minister of the state, turned a blind eye to the violence, allowing the carnage. More in this report.
On 27th of February 2002, a fire ripped through a train at Godhra station in Gujarat, burning 59 Hindu pilgrims alive. Although an independent inquiry concluded the fire was accident, Muslims were wrongfully blamed for the blaze. Subsequently, furious Hindu mobs rampaged through Muslim neighborhoods. During the slaughter in Ahmedabad and hundreds of other towns and villages, Hindu mobs rounded up and raped Muslim women. Senior police officers even testified that Chief Minister Modi had ordered officers not to intervene as the killings spread. The bloody riots tarred Modi's international image, leading him to be blacklisted for a decade by the US and the EU. An Indian court found 31 Hindus guilty of murdering 33 Muslims, but most of the perpetrators of violence have gone scot-free. Modi continues to push anti-Muslim policies with moves such as the controversial citizenship law and abrogation of occupied Kashmir's special status. The majoritarian attitude has even extended to farmers who have been protesting against the farm laws for nearly 3 months. Last year, a report by the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom categorized India as a country of particular concern over the treatment of minorities.
In India, more farmers are heading towards Delhi borders to join the protest against 3 agriculture laws. Growers from over 700 villages of Punjab are traveling on buses and trains to reach the capital's borders. Farmers have yet another event scheduled for Women's Day on March 8th, when women are expected to move to the borders. Earlier, UN Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet urged India to find an equitable solution to the farmers' crisis. Bachelet also criticized New Delhi's actions against activists and journalists covering the protests. In a statement, she also condemned India's efforts to curb freedom of expression on social media. Saudi Arabia has rejected U.S. reports findings that the Crown Prince approved the plan to kill or capture Jamal Khashoggi in 2018. In a statement, the Saudi Foreign Ministry termed the report negative and false. The ministry said the journalist's killing was a heinous crime by a rogue group. It said the United States intelligence report contains inaccurate information and conclusions. Earlier, the U.S. sanctioned 76 Saudis, including senior intelligence officials, under a new policy, the Khashoggi ban. President Joe Biden said he told the Saudi king he will hold them accountable for human rights abuses.
I spoke yesterday with the king, not the prince, made it clear to him that the rules are changing, and we're going to be announcing significant changes today and on Monday. We are going to hold them accountable for human rights abuses.
President Joe Biden says Iran cannot act with impunity and warned it should be careful after the U.S. airstrikes in Syria. Biden authorized airstrikes on Iranian-backed militia in eastern Syria in response to rocket attacks against U.S. targets in Iraq. Earlier, White House spokesperson Jen Psaki said the attacks against Americans will not go unnoticed. She added President Joe Biden has the right to take action at the time and the manner of his choosing when there are threats to the United States interests. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Saeed Khatibzadeh strongly condemned the strikes. Khatibzadeh described the attack as illegal aggression and a violation of human rights and international law. Meanwhile, the Syrian Foreign Ministry also said the attack in the east of the country is a cowardly act. In a statement, it urged Biden not to follow the law of the jungle. In Iraq, 5 people have died after security forces fired live ammunition to disperse anti-government protesters. Iraqi High Commission for Human Rights says hundreds of people have been injured during clashes in the southern city of Nasiriyah. It said these include several members of the security forces who got injured as protesters retaliated to the fires. Following the deaths, Iraqi's prime minister has removed the governor of the province, which was one of the major demands of the protesters. Nearly 600 people have been killed in protest-related violence in Iraq since late 2019. The European members of the UN Security Council have called on Israel to stop demolitions of the Bulletin settlements in the Jordan Valley. The United Kingdom, France, Ireland, Norway, and Estonia issued a joint statement at the end of a monthly session of Security Council on the Middle Eastern conflict. The statement expressed concerns at recent demolitions and confiscations of donations by Israeli authorities in the Jordan Valley. It called on Israel to allow full, sustained, and unimpeded humanitarian access to the community in Hamsa al-Baqaya. The Jordan Valley is a strategic path of land that has emerged as a flashpoint in the struggle over the West Bank. A woman has been shot dead during anti-coup protests in Myanmar's Munyawa town. Meanwhile, police have detained dozens of protesters to prevent opponents of the military coup from gathering.
Protesters took to the streets in multiple cities against the army and to demand the release of all detainees. Police fired tear gas at crowds to disperse them in Yangon and Davi. At the UN, Myanmar's envoy urged the world body to use any means necessary to take action against the military. UN Special Envoy on Myanmar pushed for a collective and clear signal in support of democracy. Meanwhile, China and Russia said the international community should avoid interfering in Myanmar's internal affairs. Earlier, Myanmar's military-appointed election commission annulled the November poll results.
It's now time for a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Brazil has reported more than 1,300 new COVID-19 deaths as its toll reached over 252,000. Globally, the coronavirus has claimed over 2.5 million lives and infected over 113 million people. More on the coronavirus in this report.
The shortages of coronavirus vaccines causing more global divides and skepticism over certain vaccines are proving to be the major obstacles in battle against pandemic. In Brazil, prosecutors are seeking suspension of purchasing India's COVID-19 vaccine over concerns that it has not yet completed its phase 3 clinical trials. This came as rising cases filling Brazil's intensive care wards to the brim forced its capital city to impose a lockdown. In U.S., President Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion plan to address the toll of pandemic has been advanced to the House of Representatives for debate. Food and Drug Administration's advisor panel voted in favor of authorizing Johnson & Johnson's vaccine for emergency use. Meanwhile, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's head said a recent decline in COVID-19 cases may be stalling.
Over the last few weeks, cases and hospital admissions in the United States had been coming down since early January, and deaths had been declining in the past week. But the latest data suggests that these declines may be stalling, potentially leveling off at still a very high number. We at CDC consider this a very concerning shift in the trajectory.
The UN Security Council has demanded the parties to all conflicts to engage immediately in sustained ceasefire to allow for vaccinations. World Health Organization says countries making individual deals for vaccines threaten supply for COVAX program for developing countries. Meanwhile, European countries are urging public to take AstraZeneca's vaccine, seeking to stem skepticism about its effectiveness that is leaving many supplies unused.
If I look at the numbers, I believe that it's to do with the organization giving out appointments until we get things underway better in all the federal states. We are also familiar with the discussion that there may be a few people who aren't taking up the offer of a vaccine. We urgently advise people to get vaccinated. This vaccine is safe and effective. It offers protection just like the other two vaccines.
The Czech government has also announced strict new restrictions over the next 3 weeks to slow the fast spread of infections. Meanwhile, G20 nations have warned against the uneven distribution of vaccines as leaders consider how to create even footing for recovery from the pandemic.
In Pakistan, 33 more patients of coronavirus have died overnight. The health ministry says the nationwide death toll has risen to 12,837. The ministry said over 39,000 tests were conducted in the past 24 hours, of which 1,315 returned positive. So far, nearly 579,000 people have been infected in the country, while over 544,000 have recovered. The ministry said the number of active cases stands at 21,554. It said the number of patients admitted to hospitals has dropped below 2,000. In the Pakistan Super League, the Karachi Kings beat Multan Sultan by 7 wickets at the National Stadium in Karachi. Kings chased down the target of 196 runs with 7 balls to spare, thanks to Babar Azam's 90. For Sultan, Shahnawaz Dani took 2 wickets for 28 runs. In a later fixture, Peshawar Zulmi will face Islamabad United at the same venue. For the latest news updates, you can follow us on our social media at indus.news.